getting into our first segment of the day, we are going to be talking about the Cowboys and the very interesting start or almost non-start that has taken place over the course of the past few days as free agency has opened up across the NFL. The Cowboys went the first 2 days without making any moves at all, other than they did re-sign a long snapper. But in terms of big impact moves, the Cowboys were going to be under a microscope, which they always are because they are the Dallas Cowboys. But owner Jerry Jones at the Senior Bowl said they are going to be all in, and everybody is very fixated on that specific term that Jerry Jones used. And now, as a result, anytime they don't do anything, it becomes that much bigger of a deal. So I do agree that, well, first we'll get into the one move they actually did make, which was signing linebacker Eric Kendricks to a 1-year deal. This was very interesting because Kendricks was initially reported to be signing with the 49ers, but instead he reroutes and is on his way to Dallas. Kendricks is going to be entering his age 32 season in his 10th year in the NFL. He was once an All-Pro first-team selection with the Minnesota Vikings in 2019, and now he's actually reuniting with his former head coach, now defensive coordinator of the Cowboys, Mike Zimmer, who they just brought in. So Kendricks is a nice player and at a position of need for the Cowboys, where their linebacking group has really been riddled with injuries and as a result has been underperforming. I think this was their biggest need, and they go get a veteran who has been doing this for a long time. He has 8 straight seasons with over 100 total tackles, which should help out the Cowboys. But despite that, it has been an underwhelming start to free agency for Cowboys fans, where they saw many of their starters from last year leave. Tyler Biadasz, their center, Tony Pollard, Dorrance Armstrong, and Stephon Gilmore are all on their way out and going to new teams. It is also still up in the air, but staple of their offensive line, Tyron Smith, is not expected to be back as of now. At least that could change, but we are seeing a lot of departures for the Cowboys. And again, after saying that the team was going to be all in, a lot of people were really fixated on what the Cowboys were going to do this offseason, and we're only a few days into this. So does this mean that they're going to be a dumpster fire next year? Definitely not, but this is a disappointing, I think, beginning to free agency. Now, I want to make it clear that 2 things. A, it is still very young in the offseason. I don't think that it would have really been possible. I just don't believe it's possible to win a Super Bowl in March as it is. So I wouldn't say this is a full-time panic mode for Cowboys fans. So I'll start by saying that. I also do feel like the way that if you are going to attack free agency aggressively, that can tend to overpaying at times. And the Cowboys, who are in a bit of a financial situation both currently and having 3 cornerstone players being eligible for contract extensions in CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, and Micah Parsons, there's a lot that goes into this, and they can't really afford to go out there overspending. That being said, doing nothing is pretty surprising here, especially I thought in the running back market, where we saw all of these different guys moving around teams, and some more than others getting pretty solid deals, but also not overly expensive. I specifically look at the likes of a Derrick Henry, who is getting $8 million per year annually from the Baltimore Ravens. Why the Cowboys couldn't go out and make a move similar to that, I really don't have an answer for you. As it currently stands, Deuce Vaughn is their running back 1, and I just don't think that that is a recipe for success. Now, there are still other guys out there on the market, but all of the top-end talent in a very well-rounded running back class this free agency has already been snatched up, and the Cowboys are sitting here with very little to show. I also thought, not that they necessarily had to make the move, but when you talk about being all in and you look at what the Giants gave up for defensive end Brian Burns, I see no reason why the Cowboys couldn't have gone out and addressed that position as well. And they're losing Dorrance Armstrong, who granted was more of a rotational defensive piece for them, but still a player at the position as well. And the Giants just gave up a second and a fifth round pick. Obviously, it came with a big extension after that as well. And they are going to still have to pay Micah Parsons that big money. But I'm just thinking out loud here, if you're going to be all in for this season, Jerry Jones, when he made this comment, he specifically referenced the Rams Super Bowl team from a couple years ago, where they went out and they made these big time moves, and they really put all their eggs in the basket for that 2021 season. And it ultimately panned out in a championship for them. 2022 was a down year, but with a well-run organization, you can help build yourself back up, and we saw the Rams trend upwards, make the playoffs last season, and they were a very solid team under good coaching, and they had good players. And the Cowboys, I just see no reason why, again, if you're talking all in, you go get an edge rusher like Brian Burns. That is probably a top 10 edge rusher in the league, and that's all you had to pay him. Now, again, probably somewhat came into a situation where Burns, I mean, he didn't have to sign off on the trade. He could have been upset maybe if he was traded without promise of a long-term deal. But again, just thinking out loud here, I don't want to bury the Cowboys for this move specifically, but again, it's very strange how slow this is all developed for the Cowboys, which begs to ask the question, where do they go from here? And like I mentioned, the priority for them is definitely to extend their key players. It's going to be interesting to see how they sort of balance which players will be the priority for them. As of now, it seems like CeeDee Lamb is the number one on the to-do list to get him under contract long term. He's entering the final year of his rookie deal. He put together the best receiver season we've seen from a Dallas Cowboy since prime Dez Bryant. He was the first receiver to be all-pro first team since Dez's season in 2014. And Micah Parsons, who is another one of these big-time players for them, he still has 2 years left on his rookie deal. He outwardly said to the media that he is willing to wait for them to pay Lamb before he gets his contract of his own, knowing the timeline of the situation and understanding sort of how things need to play out here in order to retain this nucleus. It's also interesting when you talk about Dak Prescott, who has come with all types of different takes in terms of how good is he, how much is he worth. Now, he is entering the final year of his contract. He signed an extension in a few years ago, and now it is coming up to an end here. They have not had any negotiations up to this point between Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys. NFL Network's Jane Slater reported that it shouldn't be too much of a cause for concern, that she expects this to take place more so along the lines of August. It also becomes a little bit more interesting now that there's this story that's coming out about the sexual assault allegations against the quarterback. Now, he's being investigated by the police. He is also filing a lawsuit against the woman that accused him for extortion. So all of this is alleged at the moment. There's a lot to unpack, and that starts with the police doing their duties to sort of resolve all of this. But this just came out a couple days ago. We are still very scarce for details on this. But if you take this out of consideration, which it is a big deal, but again, a lot of unknowns in this scenario. If you're talking about Dak Prescott, the player on the field, I do personally think that they should look to extend him. And I know that the idea of wrapping up $50 million plus in a quarterback that isn't top 3 is a tough pill to swallow. But I think when you look at the Cowboys here, it's either that or you sort of have to blow up the whole operation, because Dak Prescott, I know that he's not many people's favorite quarterbacks out there, but he was a very good quarterback this past year, and he was second in MVP voting. He was the runner-up, so he was all-pro second team as well. He led the league in touchdowns. This was the best season of his career, and I think that that is sort of more so who he is. I know the playoff success is still a little bit up in the air, but when you take into consideration that Kirk Cousins just got $45 million, I view Dak and Kirk to be very similar in terms of where they rank among the NFL quarterbacks. And I feel like once Dak Prescott is gone, you have a very similar situation to the Vikings. Now, the Cowboys are closer to contention to at least some degree than the Vikings were last year. So now the Vikings, they have a lot of work to do anyways as it is with their talent on the roster as a whole. Now they're settling for Sam Darnold on a 1-year contract. Unless you think that Trey Lance can come in and somehow turn himself into a franchise quarterback, the Cowboys don't have a backup plan, and I don't think that the infrastructure with the Cowboys is strong enough to just let a very good quarterback walk in free agency. I look a lot because another quarterback that's coming up on the final year of their contract is Tua Tagovailoa for the Miami Dolphins. They're very similar in some sense in terms of public perception of them is not extremely high. They are flawed quarterbacks. I think that Dak is better, but neither of them have really proven to be anything in the postseason either. I just feel like when you look at the structure of both of these organizations, I feel like the Miami Dolphins have done a very good job to build up the personnel on that offense to make it a very quarterback-friendly system. Now, of course, Mike McDaniel coming out of the Shanahan-McVay coaching tree, we've seen these offenses be able to be sustained with maybe not star power at the quarterback position alone. Not going to get into the debate of how good Brock Purdy is, but he was very easily, as a 7th-round rookie, able to slide into the position, and they've gone to back-to-back NFC championships and almost won a Super Bowl. I think the Dolphins are structured a little bit in a similar way, where you have a couple elite weapons on the outside in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. You have a solid offensive line. The pre-snap motions and some of the run scheme, when you look at the misdirections and different looks that they throw at you, I think it's one of the most nuanced run games in the NFL. That's not the luxury that the Dallas Cowboys have, where Mike McCarthy, a little bit of the older guard, he still has some questions surrounding himself. And while CeeDee Lamb is obviously elite, I don't view the rest of the offense to be in that same light. And for them going forward here with Dak as their guy, they could also look to restructure a deal that opens up more cap space for them in this coming season. We see this happen all the time. We saw the way that it worked out for Kirk Cousins in Atlanta this past year. Patrick Mahomes regularly goes back to that massive deal that he signed with Kansas City, and just deferring the guaranteed money and all those different things that helps reduce the salary cap hit. Ultimately, we're still a few months away from that. So it's not something we need to dive into really any much longer when we're talking specifically about Dak Prescott, but it is an interesting thing to consider here as the Cowboys move forward. And in terms of currently what the Cowboys can do and what they will do, the Jones all-in quote, when he first mentioned the Rams, I sort of thought it sounded like he was going to be leaning towards moving off of some draft capital to go out and get a disgruntled star maybe around the league. And there are some options that could be available. Stephon Diggs has been talked about for months now. Devontae Adams as well. If you're looking at the running back position, Alvin Kamara could be somebody that becomes available as well. I can't imagine that A, the Vikings would make this move, or B, the Cowboys have the money to make it work. But imagine they get Justin Jefferson for this upcoming season. I think that is what I consider to be all in. Again, depends on how literal you want to take that quote in itself. But I would like to see the Cowboys make some sort of moves here. It's going to be interesting how they weigh using their draft picks to fill in some of the holes versus going out and potentially trying to move on from those to get a star. Currently, they can maybe trade future draft capital and try and balance both of those. But again, a lot is still up in the air here for the Cowboys. I do really want to see them get some help additionally on the back end of their secondary. I feel like safety is a position of weakness for them. A random name I just wanted to throw out there is Cooper DeJean out of Iowa. I think he could be a nice fit for the Cowboys, could be somewhere around that draft range as well. He has some positional flexibility. He played a lot of cornerback in college, but a lot of scouts also project him to be more of a safety when he reaches the NFL. So just a name out there. I also feel like they could look to address the offensive line in this draft as well. So those are the two positions, because I do think that despite how terrible their playoff performance was against the Packers, it was an extremely uncharacteristic defensive game if you look at how the defense operated on the season as a whole, and everything fell apart for them there. Now they're losing some players, so they have to sort of fill in those gaps, but I don't think that they are extremely far away from being in contention, especially when you look at that NFC that I don't think has the juggernaut of the Chiefs that teams have to get through in order to make the Super Bowl. But that is all we have time for on this subject today. Trust me, it's the Cowboys. If you want more talk, I'm sure it will be coming. Hopefully not too much, but we will keep you updated on all things in regards to that as the offseason continues. For now, we are going to be taking our first break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, I want to dive into some of the young quarterbacks that have benefited the most from the first few days of free agency. So stick with us, and we will be right back.